Hi everyone. Today I'm going to simplify the anatomy of spinothalamic tract for you. And the goal of this session is that at the end of this session you will be able to simply illustrate the pathway of the spinothalamic tract in the most accurate and the simplified manner. So what are the spinothalamic tracts? These are the important tracts found in the spinal cord, one of the ascending tracts, which carry the sensation of pain, temperature, touch, and pressure from the periphery via spinal nerve, and they take these sensations via pathway all the way to the cerebral cortex where we perceive these sensations consciously at the level of the somatosensory cerebral cortex. So what is the pathway which is involved in this process? So there are two kinds of the spinothalamic tracts. The sensation of pain and temperature is primarily concerned with the lateral spinothalamic tract, while the sensation of touch and pressure is carried by the anterior spinothalamic tract. The two spinothalamic tracts, they have almost the same pathway when they go from the spinal cord to the brainstem to the cerebral cortex, apart from few differences. The first obvious difference is in their location in the spinal cord, which we will see later. And the second difference is we have already discussed is in the modality that they carry. Since the lateral spinothalamic tract carries pain and temperature sensation, the anterior spinothalamic tract carries the touch and pressure sensation. So what is the pathway of these spinothalamic tracts? To illustrate it, I have already drawn the cross sections of the spinal cord at two different levels. This is the cross section of the medulla, cross section of pons, cross section of midbrain. Together they constitute the brainstem. This is the coronal view of the cerebral cortex, in which we are going to emphasize on the thalamus, internal capsule, and the somatosensory area. And this is the sagittal view of the brain, where we can see the highlighted area as somatosensory area. The story of the spinothalamic tract starts when there is external stimulus of pain, temperature, touch, or pressure. These impulses are carried via the posterior root of the mixed spinal nerve, and we can appreciate the posterior root ganglion. So these neurons are actually the first order neurons whose cell bodies lie in the posterior root ganglion. These neurons enter the spinal cord, but before synapsing with any other neuron, they ascend or descend for one or two segments of the spinal cord. And by ascending or descending, they form an important tract of Lissauer. Once they do so, they reach the ascending level of the spinal cord, and finally they synapse with the cells in the posterior root ganglion, which are the substantia gelatinosa. So after synapsing with these neurons become the second order neurons, and I'm going to show them in a different color. The axons of these second order neurons, they cross the same segment of the spinal cord, and they move to the contralateral white column by crossing the anterior gray commissure and anterior white commissure. So here the anterior spinothalamic tract is located here in this area, anterior white column of the spinal cord, while the lateral spinothalamic tract will be located here in the lateral part of the white matter of the spinal cord. Once these fibers, they travel and they move to the contralateral side of the white column. Now these fibers ascend the spinal cord in a form of a tract, and this tract is known as the spinothalamic tract. When they ascend through the spinal cord, new fibers are added to the medial aspect of this tract, so that the cervical fibers, they will lie to the more medial part of the tract, while the sacral fibers, they lie to the lateral part of the tract. Now these second order neurons forming the tract, spinothalamic tract, when they reach the medulla of the brainstem, they lie at a level between the inferior olivary nucleus and the spinal nucleus of the trigeminal nerve. So this is the side where the spinothalamic tract lies. At this point, the anterior spinothalamic tract joins the lateral spinothalamic tract and the spinotractal tract. And together they form an important structure which is known as the spinal lemniscus. So together they form the spinal lemniscus at the level of the medulla. Now this spinal lemniscus ascends through the pons, and when it reaches the pons, it lies at the posterior part of the pons here. From here they move to the midbrain, and in the midbrain the spinal lemniscus is located here, just lateral to this part, which is the medial lemniscus. Now from here on, the fibers of the spinal lemniscus, they pass and they synapse with the third order neurons in the ventral posterolateral nucleus of the thalamus. We will use blue color for the third order neurons. So this red area shows the thalamus, and the fibers, they synapse with the third order neurons here. From here, the third order neurons, the fibers pass through the posterior limb of the internal capsule, and from here through the corna radiata, finally they reach the somatosensory area of the cerebral cortex, which is area 3, 1 and 2. In this sagittal view, we can appreciate the area 3, 1, 2 of the cerebral cortex, which receives the sensation of pain, temperature, touch and pressure carried via the anterior spinothalamic tract or the lateral spinothalamic tract. So just to quickly recall the pathway of the spinothalamic tracts, we started with the sensation of pain, temperature, touch and pressure. These two modalities carried via the lateral spinothalamic tract, and these two via the anterior spinothalamic tract. The axons of the first order neurons, they ascend and descend for one or two segments of the spinal cord, forming a tract of Lissauer, which is this one. After doing so, finally they synapse with the second order neurons, a substantia gelatinosa. Now the axons of these second order neurons, they cross and they move to the contralateral side of the spinal cord, where they lie in the lateral white column. They reach the contralateral side of the white column of the spinal cord, and finally they ascend in the form of spinothalamic tract. When the spinothalamic tract ascends through the different segments of the spinal cord, new fibers are added to the medial aspect. So the cervical fibers, they are more medial than the sacral fibers. Finally, they reach the level of the medulla, where they lie between the inferior olivary nucleus and the spinal nucleus of the trigeminal nerve, and spinothalamic tract joins the anterior and the lateral spinothalamic tract join the spinotractal tract to form the spinal lemniscus. Now the spinal lemniscus passes through the pons, particularly its posterior part. From here it passes to the midbrain, where it lies lateral to the medial lemniscus. Finally, these fibers synapse with third order neurons of ventral posterolateral nucleus of the thalamus. Now, axons of these third order neurons, they pass to the posterior limb of the internal capsule, from here they pass through the corna radiata, and finally they reach the somatosensory area of the cerebral cortex, which is area 3, 1 and 2. In this way, the sensations of pain, touch pressure and touch which are carried by the spinothalamic tracts, they reach the iliac cerebral cortex and they are perceived consciously. So at the end, if we summarize, the first order neurons of the spinothalamic tract, they have the cell bodies in the posterior root ganglion and they enter the spinal cord through the posterior gray column. The second order neurons lie at the level of the substantia gelatinosa and their axons cross over to the opposite side. They constitute the spinothalamic tract, which ascends through the brainstem. And finally, the third order neurons, they were present at the level of thalamus, its ventral posterolateral nucleus, the axons of which reach the somatosensory area of the cortex.